Can we talk without a full face on? It looks...
No, you have to enduro with the full face. Take it off while we're talking.
I will. You can talk. You can ask me.
Okay.
How do I feel about the Ibis? Let me take this off so I can talk. I have all the things.
Hey everyone, I'm Mike Kazmer. We're here in Pemberton, British Columbia for the Pinkbike Field Test. Today we're going to be taking a look at the new Ibis Mojo HD5. As the name implies, this is the 5th generation of the Mojo. It has 27.5 inch wheels, and it's aimed at that enduro racer, all mountain kind of rider. It has 153 millimeters of rear travel, and for this year, it gets a bump up to 170 millimeters up front. The model we have here, it's the XT build with a few upgrades. It's got an upgraded fork, and the shock is the Float X2 versus the DPX2 that's kind of a stock spec. On this bike, you get Shimano's XT 12-speed drivetrain, Shimano's 4-piston XT brakes, Ibis' own aluminum wheel set. You get a Thompson stem, something you don't see spec'd quite as often anymore. The Mojo HD5 still uses a DW link suspension design. It's got those 2 short links, but what's different on this one versus the previous version is what Ibis is calling their traction tune suspension philosophy. Basically, they realized that they could get away with using a lighter compression tune and a lighter rebound tune in order to allow that rear wheel to really hug the ground and kind of track over small bumps and undulations. So again, we'll get into that. We've been doing some experimentation to kind of see how that feels out in the real world. The Mojo HD5 now uses bushings in the lower link as opposed to the cartridge bearings found in the previous model. According to Ibis, they found that those just have a longer lifespan. They don't get as notchy or rough feeling quite as quickly as you would find with normal cartridge bearings. There's also a lifetime replacement policy on those bushings, so if they do wear out, you can get them swapped out for free. Other frame details include tube and 2 internal cable routing, so now it should be really easy. Just feed that housing in one side, it should pop out the other. No need to fish around. Along with that, there's also a new little fender on the bottom link that's designed to help keep mud and rocks or anything in there that could get pinched between the frame and that moving part. And the final couple little details, there's threaded bottom bracket and ISCG 05 tabs that are also removable. So if you don't plan on running a bash guard or a chain guide, you can pop those off, save a few grams.
Just like the rest of our bikes, we had Maxxis control tires on this Ibis. It was the DHF on the front and a DHR2 on the back, both with the double down casing. For the fork, I ran about 94 PSI, and for the shock, I ran about 225 PSI, which was about 30% sag for me. I'm 6'1", the reach felt a touch short for me at 472 millimeters. How about you, Kaz?
I'm a little bit shorter. The bike felt pretty comfortable for me. A lot of the bikes I've been riding these days are in that 470 to 480 range, so it felt right at home. As far as tire pressures for myself, I had 20 pounds up front and 22 in the rear. Shock I sent with 30% sag, and that equaled about 180 pounds. And the fork I ran 72 PSI. This bike has the shortest wheelbase out of all the bikes that we're testing in the enduro category, and that's noticeable in the climbs. It kind of gives it a nice, easy to maneuver handling. In tighter, more technical sections, no problem just getting up and over and around whatever gets in your way. It feels closer to, I'd say, kind of a aggressive trail bike rather than a super long, slack enduro race machine.
Yeah, I think Kaz and I both agree this was probably the strongest climber of this category. We both climbed with the shock lever left wide open, no issues.
Yeah, there's plenty of traction for when you get in some of those loose, slippery sections, and not a lot of bob either, which is always that nice balance to find.
So it's a relatively short bike. The reach is slightly on the smaller side, the chainstays are short, and it has those little itty bitty wheels. But that all adds up to a bike that's quick and snappy, easy to get up to speed, does really well in the corners. For me, I think it got overwhelmed a little quickly in the rough stuff. It didn't have that full, enduro race plow machine feel. It kind of required more body energy to keep on line than, say, the Specialized or the Yeti.
This bike still uses a DW Link suspension layout, the same as it's used for years, but this year, Ibis unveiled what they call their traction tune suspension philosophy. Basically, if you go through the setup guide on their website, you'll end up with settings that have a lot faster rebound tune than you might be used to. They did some data acquisition testing as well as testing with their Enduro World Series athletes, and they felt that this was basically the settings that developed the most controlled and fastest ride. So that's how I started out my testing on this bike. So the rebound speed in the parking lot, it feels kind of crazy fast, like almost as if it's all the way off, because it basically is. So a little bit of hesitation, headed in the bike park, did some laps on some rougher trails. I gave the tune a try, and on chunkier trails, the bike was a lot more rideable than I thought. Based on the parking lot test, I thought it'd just be getting bounced and bucked everywhere. That wasn't the case. It felt, pretty normal, but there were a few occasions where it felt like I was having to fight the bike to stay on line, a little bit more unsettled than I wanted. So after trying it there, I headed to some jump trails. That's where I just really decided I couldn't live with those settings. Riding down A-line, first few jumps were all right, but then I had one instance where the bike kind of felt like it was tossing me. Last thing you want when you're on a high-speed big jump.
You don't like doing nosedives on A-line?
Now this going, I don't like that very much.
That's
Kind of
strange.
scary. I know, it's weird, yeah. So basically what I did, and something that anyone can do, I just set the shock up as I normally would with kind of my preferred rebound settings. There's plenty of range so that you can do that. With my normal rebound settings back in place, I felt right at home with the bike. It felt nice and calm, composed, had that nice kind of smooth out the ground nicely, and no issues there. Feel free to experiment with it, but don't be afraid to kind of take matters in your own hands and set up the bike in the way that's most comfortable for you.
So we timed the Ibis along with all the other enduro bikes on Schlayer. Good mixture of rocky technical sections, few step downs, few drops. For me, this was actually the slowest bike of the test. I got 6% slower than my fastest bike.
That goes for me too. I put down my slowest time out of the 4 bikes, and my time lapse is about 3% slower.
So the Shimano drivetrain and brakes were excellent throughout the duration of the test. Shifting remained smooth, especially under power, really shines there. The brakes worry-free as well, didn't need to be bled or anything. As well as that, the wheels took a beating. We smashed these through the Whistler bike park. They both spin straight, no dents. That's awesome.
Yeah, and those are Ibis's, the Ibis Zone kind of house brand aluminum wheel set, so held up well, nice and wide, worked well with those bigger tires. There's one component that seemed to kind of stand out as maybe not belonging, and it's that Thompson stem. And that did have its reign of popularity in the kind of mid to early 2000s, but these days those 3mm bolts all around, it just doesn't seem like it fits in with the overall aesthetic of this bike. Now the stem did work well, there's no failures or anything like that, but I do feel like the money for that high-end kind of fancy stem could be spent elsewhere. The suspension components worked well. They've got that custom-tuned Fox 36 up front and the Float X2 in the rear. They both have a lighter compression, lighter rebound tune, but there's still plenty of range that even if you decide to deviate from Ibis's suggested settings, you should be able to find your happy place in there. One potential con, if you decide to go the Float X2 upgrade route, is that shock takes up extra room and it kind of steals some of that water bottle space. You're gonna have to pick your cage and bottle carefully, and there's a good chance you might not be able to run a full-length water bottle. Otherwise, the air can is gonna smack that every time the shock goes deeper into its travel.
The Ibis is super versatile. It's a great all-rounder. I think it could be a great one-bike quiver bike. It climbs super well despite the amount of travel it has. And on the way down, it's great at slapping those corners. I had a ton of fun in the bike park just railing turns the whole way down.
The color of this bike was polarizing, but not even polarizing. There's pretty universal agreement that we weren't fans of how it looks, and then the Pinkbike commenters seemed to agree when this bike first launched. Luckily, there's a black and gray version. Yeah, Jason and I both are on the same page that this bike is super versatile, kind of good for everything, but I don't think it's that enduro race bike that they built it to be. There's other bikes that are faster, they have bigger wheels usually, so that's something to keep in mind if you've got dreams of enduro glory. Ibis' new traction-tuned suspension philosophy, it's not going to be for everybody. It's there if you want to experiment with it, but for me, it just didn't really work out. Final point, this bike could use better chainstay protection. It's an easy fix. You want to take some mastic tape, hit it on that chainstay. There's an exposed part, which is exactly where the chain likes to slap, and it can get pretty noisy on rougher downhills.
So who's the Ibis for? I think it's for someone who wants the extra comfort of a little bit more travel, but still wants to plow those aggressive trails and have an easy time climbing on the way up.
I'm in the same boat, just kind of a really versatile bike. It's got plenty of travel, but if you end up on some mellower trails, you're not going to be hating your decision, but you can also go do some pretty rowdy stuff and come away just fine. That's the Ibis Mojo HD5. Stay tuned for more content from the Pinkbike Field Test, as well as a roundtable discussion where we go over pros and cons of all the bikes in this category.